Operation Highjump began in August 1946. It was the largest and most heavily armed expedition to Antarctica in history.
The operation was led by Admiral Richard Byrd, one of the most reputable and respected naval officers of all time. The official purpose of the mission was military training and scientific research.
But the operation had other aims, including extending American sovereignty over the globe, as well as finding and extinguishing a secret Nazi base that was armed with advanced flying saucer technology.
This episode is going to be completely out of control, and I'm here for it. If you're into conspiracy theories, alternative history, UFOs, or government cover-ups, this one is for you. I'm your co-host, Izzo, joined here by your other co-host, Magnum.
And this is the Swerve Podcast.
Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the Swerve Podcast. You know, we've got another crazy episode here for you today, so welcome.
What's up, everybody? I'm very excited for this one. This deep dive, it has it all. We're going to be talking about a little bit of everything. We got UFOs, we got conspiracy, we've got it all. It's going to be good. So I hope you're ready to enjoy another episode. But before we get into that, if you're a first-time listener and you're wondering what you've stumbled across, we're the Swerve Podcast, and we do deep research on topics that swerve off the mainstream path, then talk about them in an uncensored way that's not boring. Here we like to prioritize listener-requested topics, preferably topics previously unknown to us, doing the extensive deep dive research that you don't have to. Typically, we cover fun conspiracy stuff, fringe or cutting-edge science, forgotten or alternative history, strange myths and urban legends, consciousness, UFOs, true crime, the paranormal, or unexplained mysteries. But before we get into the basics of today's topic, Izzo, would you enlighten the listeners on our special podcast tradition?
Yeah, the tradition is that we like to drink while we record these episodes, and usually we'll take listener-recommended drinks, maybe drinks that are on theme with the topic, and then we just share what we're drinking with you, and we invite you to drink along with us, you know, crack open a cold one and sit down and listen to the episode. It's going to be crazy, so you might need some alcohol to help you through it. Yeah, so I'll start the roundtable off here, and I'm drinking some white wine for this episode.
Oh.
Very basic, but I don't know. Figured I needed
Antarctica's,
it for this. Yeah,
Antarctica's white.
Sure,
covered in
yeah.
snow.
I guess it's
Have a
on
white
theme
wine.
then, everyone.
Doing our mental gymnastics to have our drinks on theme. I've got one. I made a Cove soda. Can you see this? This is supposed to be white, blue, and red. You can barely see it because it's kind of mixed up now. But I took a ice pop flavored Cove soda. I thought we were talking about Antarctica. They're going on the Cove, coming in with ships and stuff with Operation Highjump. Let's make a drink with Cove soda. I don't really even know what to call it. Rocket pop and vodka, maybe. We'll have it in our social media. It's actually probably some of the best soda I've ever had in my entire life. We should reach out to them and sponsor the podcast. Yeah. Honestly, it's so fucking good. No calories. It's got prebiotics. Here I am pitching Cove.
Yeah,
but it's great. It's great shit. We'll have that on our Instagram. But before we hop into
Operation Rocket Pop is all I'm gonna say.
Yes. That is a good one. You know what? Let's drink to that. Let's have a Pink Whitney to start this off.
Okay.
This is going to be a crazy episode. I mean, we gotta lubricate ourselves here because mentally we are going to be all over the map. I want to say before we hop into the basics here, this topic won the August 2024 voting block. It was recommended by our loyal Patreon Spurgalicious Asshat. Reminder, if you would like to help decide what topics we cover on the podcast, you can definitely do so. You just have to sign up for free on our Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/theswervepodcast, press the blue join for free button, and then you can sign up with an email address, and it takes less than 1 minute. You can vote on what topics we cover next on the podcast. I would like to say this topic will have a little bit of everything. It's all encompassing. Government cover-ups, UFOs, it's got occultism, aliens, strange alternative history that's mixed with real historical events. We're going to break it down. We're going to figure out what the hell is going on with Operation Highjump. And I'm very excited to hop into this. So let's do it. Let's go into the basics. This is going to be somewhat of a short basics. I'm going to give a high-level overview of what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the episode, because there is a lot to this story. Operation Highjump, for those who are unfamiliar with this was the code name for a massive U.S. Navy military operation to Antarctica from August 1946 to February 1947. At the time, this was the largest military expedition to Antarctica in history. Operation Highjump was spearheaded by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, and this dude, we have a whole section on him. He was extremely accomplished and a very decorated naval officer. This guy's going to come up a lot in this topic. But this is where things kind of get strange. Allegedly, Admiral Byrd documented extremely bizarre encounters during his flights over Antarctica. He observed an unknown region filled with lush vegetation, lakes, rivers, in the middle of the coldest place on Earth. How's that possible? What's he seeing? We'll get into it. He was also hijacked by unknown flying disc-shaped crafts and brought to an unknown location where he met a strange advanced society as well as German Nazis. Now, here's the thing. Admiral Byrd, he is released, and subsequently he organizes Operation Highjump, and allegedly this was a cover story for an attack on the Nazi base that he encountered. Notably, Operation Highjump ended abruptly and very fast. This caused some people to allege that the US was easily defeated in some strange conflict with an advanced German disc-shaped flying crafts. Here we are, folks. The claims are completely out of control with this episode, so I think let's investigate.
To understand the conspiracy theories of Operation Highjump, we must first understand the official narrative. What was the purpose of orchestrating the largest Antarctic military expedition in history? Who was Admiral Richard E. Byrd? And why is he so iconic and entangled in the center of so many conspiracy theories?
Let's talk about pre-Operation Highjump and the reasons for various expeditions to Antarctica before we get further into this section. From a strategic perspective, and in the wake of the Cold War following World War II, the poles on Earth were deemed important for the long-term planning of the US, especially considering the looming threat of nuclear weapon capabilities of the Soviet Union. So listeners, we have to keep this in mind at this period of time. There's now this looming threat, specifically more so over the North Pole than the South, but also there was interest in extending capabilities to the South Pole in the off chance that something could happen from there as well. So Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, he had stated the following in regards to this idea, quote,
Cold War tensions made the Arctic a strategic region, particularly for national security.
End quote. So Admiral Byrd advocated preparing for potential USSR threats and developing a polar presence. In modern time, he is probably the most well-known in conspiracy spaces for his association with Operation Highjump. So let's talk about this dude. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd. You know, first of all, let's just straight up get this out of the way. Rear Admiral is one of the most hilarious titles I've ever come across in my entire life. Like, you are the Rear Admiral. Yeah. What could that possibly mean? It only means one thing. That sounds like you're an extremely expert homosexual, right? Isn't it?
I guess
I'm the Rear
yeah.
Admiral.
Yeah, I wear a captain's hat.
I'm just going to throw it out there. I find that a very funny wording, but here we are. You know what else? We might as well get this out of the way before we start talking about Richard E. Byrd. His name's Dick Byrd.
Dick Byrd. Yeah.
He's the Rear Admiral, and his name is Dick Byrd.
Yeah. Unfortunate
This is a simulation.
name, but
Anyways, I just want to knock that out of the park because it's hard to keep saying his name and not, giggle to myself. I don't know why. Here's my maturity level. It's still in grade 5. But his name's Dick Byrd, and he's the Rear Admiral. So let's go. He also was an extremely successful and accomplished American naval officer. He was promoted to Rear Admiral at only the age of 41. The promotion made Byrd the youngest admiral in the history of the United States. He was the recipient of the Medal of Honor, the United States Armed Forces' highest military decoration, and the Navy Cross, the second highest honor for valor given by the U.S. Navy. He also had accumulated 22 citations and special commendations, 9 of which were for bravery and 2 for extraordinary heroism in saving the lives of others. He also received the Silver Life-Saving Medal, the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. In addition to all of this, he is the only person to have had 3 ticker tape parades. This is gay. No, this guy's having parades. I don't know, it's not Pride Month, but maybe, I don't know what's going on. Anyways, he has these 3 ticker tape parades, the Rear Admiral Dick Byrd, in New York City in 1926, 1927, and 1930, given in his honor. I also want to mention, I just found this was a fun fact. Admiral Byrd was actually present at the Japanese surrender in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd, 1945. So the point I'm trying to make with this little spiel here, he is a very high-ranking, capable person. He has a lot of recognition. He's done a lot with his career. He's the Rear Admiral.
And he just never left. He stayed in the military his whole life, it seems like. He was around for all of it.
Yep. He's going to come up a ton through our exploration into Operation Highjump. But I would like to give some things that occurred before Operation Highjump. He was a pioneer in American aviation and a very famous polar explorer. He also had crossed the Atlantic Ocean, a segment of the Arctic Circle, and a segment of the Antarctic Plateau. So he's kind of a little of a daredevil as well. This is a very crazy story. In 1921, he volunteered to attempt a solo nonstop crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. He was to use the dirigible ZR2 or ZR2 if you're not Canadian and say Z weird. On his way to the mission, his train was late and he missed the flight. What's crazy, this airship that he was supposed to be on ends up breaking into pieces mid-air, killing 44 of the 49 crew members on board. So if that train had been on time, Rear Admiral Byrd would have died. And we wouldn't be discussing this today.
Yeah. Wouldn't have all the discoveries that he kind of led.
Some other fun facts, just so you can see what kind of a guy Rear Admiral Richard Byrd was. He was friends with Henry Ford, right? This is kind of the Elon Musk of the time, you could say. So kind of like be dropping that kind of name at this time period. Now, Henry Ford helped sponsor various polar expeditions from the Ford Motor Company. And also, Richard Byrd, some of his expeditions that he was on were funded by none other than John D. Rockefeller, who we covered in episode 113. Interesting. So he's got high-level funding to go on these expeditions by questionable individuals. Another crazy thing, Admiral Byrd was an active Freemason. He became a Master Mason at the Federal Lodge No. 1 in Washington, D.C. So not only is he the Rear Admiral, he's also the Master Mason, right?
Wow. From like what I would assume is like the oldest chapter, No. 1 in Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's a good point. I don't know.
Yeah.
That might make some sense, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, one strange fact that I also found about Admiral Byrd, if you look at his gravestone, there is an upside down pointing star. I found that kind of weird. Hail Satan. Hail Satan. Izzo? You won't say it. You don't have to hail Satan. It's fine.
I don't get it. Like upside down pointing star.
Like a pentagram.
Oh, I see.
I don't know. In a lot of popular media, they have upside down pointed stars, and people will have like candles on it, and it's like a ritual type setup, things like this. I just found it very interesting. He literally does have a pentagram on his gravestone.
Damn.
So I don't know. And he's a Freemason. He's mingling with John D. Rockefeller, who we know, if you go back to episode 13, was operating the first bang buses, and this is truth, right?
Yeah, that's true. Man was an inventor.
Connecting the dots. I don't know what's going on, but there you go. 1928 to 1930 was the first expedition to the Antarctic spearheaded by Admiral Byrd. I want to emphasize that the U.S. was in Antarctica much before Operation Highjump. They set up a base called Little America at this time on the Ross Ice Shelf, which is south of the Bay of Whales. In 1933 to 1934, this was their second expedition to Antarctica. Byrd spent 5 months there alone operating a weather station, and for about a period of 150 days, he was enduring temperatures as low as minus 60 Fahrenheit, or if you convert that to Celsius, for the non-American listeners, minus 51.
That's crazy.
In this particular expedition where he's kind of a loner off by himself, he almost dies from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a stove. Very, very crazy.
Yeah, he escapes death twice, I guess, in a short period of time.
Yes.
But also, like, just being alone for 150 days. Like, the History Channel has, like, the show Alone, where it's like people, they spend 30 days out in the wilderness alone, and if they do, they get, like, $1 million or whatever. But to do it for, like, 150 days and just be fine
in
with
Antarctica.
It. In Antarctica, the coldest place on Earth. Yeah, crazy.
That's why he's the Rear Admiral.
Yeah. I'd follow that man anywhere.
I'd fuck that guy. 1939, 1940. This is the third expedition to Antarctica. So the point is, the U.S. was there much before Operation Highjump. This brings us to Operation Highjump. August 26, 1946 to February 1947. The official title of this operation was the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program. Its code name was Highjump, Operation Highjump. This comes from, the code name Operation Highjump comes from a 500 plus page declassified military document, and we'll have that linked in the description along with all of our other sources if you're interested in checking that out. Operation Highjump followed other training exercises that were done in this region, one of which was called Operation Frostbite from 1945 to 1946, and the other was Operation Nanook, which happened in 1946. Again, there was other operations that happened before Operation Highjump. It wasn't just Operation Highjump that occurred, although it seems a lot of the conspiracy theories usually all tie around Highjump itself. This operation was led and organized by Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, and it was a massive military operation to establish the Antarctic research base Little America 4, again on the Ross Ice Shelf, which is south of the Bay of Whales. So previous expeditions, they set up Little America in this region. Operation Highjump is going to that same region to set up an even bigger base. Byrd warned that the United States should adopt measures of protection against the possibility of an invasion of the country by hostile planes coming from both polar regions. So this is another motivating factor for why Richard Byrd took the U.S. military to the Antarctic. In the wake of the Cold War, we've talked about it already, a huge motivating factor. You need to be ready in the polar regions. Operation Highjump was officially under the command, actually, of another Rear Admiral Richard H. Cruzen, and Admiral Byrd was the officer in charge of the project. So I want to make that little distinction here. We always say he's in charge, but this is actually technically how authority was delegated for this operation.
Okay.
As we've mentioned, Operation Highjump was a huge, massive military expedition to Antarctica. And to give listeners a better idea of what we're talking about, this expedition included 70 different ships. This included the Coast Guard's icebreaker called Northwind and an aircraft carrier called the USS Philippine Sea, and also a submarine, the USS Senate. Big variety of ships, big operation. It also included 33 aircrafts. And the crazy thing, 4,700 soldiers. Very strange. Why are we sending such a large military force if we're just going to go set up a base in the Ross ice shelf? It is weird.
The only explanation I could think of is you want that many people just to set up the base as quickly as possible because the temperatures and the conditions are so severe.
Sure. That's the official story.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but also you could just send construction people. Well, maybe not, because you need a military base, so you need military personnel to set it up. But
why do you need a submarine and aircrafts? Would you need 33 aircrafts? You know what I'm saying? It is a little
that one's
weird.
You can explain all of them, but it is odd when you look at the entire operation.
Yep. Officially, the operation was supposed to take 6 to 8 months, and it was primarily going to be a military mission, not necessarily a scientific expedition, although it did have scientific achievements along with its military objectives. The overall goal really was aimed at raising the Navy's polar fighting capabilities. So the official objectives, according to the U.S. Navy reports on this, were 1, they wanted to train personnel and test equipment in frigid conditions. 2, consolidate and extend the United States sovereignty, which I would like to note, they did publicly deny this objective as an official goal before the expedition ended, but it later came out that this actually was a goal. So what I'm trying to point out here, they definitely did deny and lie about this for sure. So the question is, what else could they be lying about? Is it just this? It is a little weird. Number 3, they wanted to determine the feasibility of establishing and maintaining bases in the Antarctic and investigate the possible base sites. 4, they wanted to develop techniques for establishing and maintaining air bases on ice, and wanted to also apply these learned techniques in Greenland, where obviously the conditions are similar between Greenland and the Antarctic. 5, they wanted to gain knowledge of electromagnetic, geological, geographic, hydrographic, and meteorological conditions in the area. Those are the official objectives of Operation Highjump.
I was just going to say on the point 5, I remember it from the other Antarctica episode that we did, but the most meteorite impacts on Earth were discovered in Antarctica. And one of the theories behind that was because everything is covered in ice and is white, you would see these black dots appear and easier to spot.
That makes sense. Now they did, although this was a military mission, they did have many other accomplishments. They performed the first dives underneath Antarctica by Americans during this operation. They completed the jet-assisted flight of 6 naval C-47 Skytrains from the deck of an aircraft carrier to an unprepared snow-surfaced landing field. I guess that makes sense why they brought aircrafts, right? They're testing them, see if they can actually even work in this condition. But did you need 33? Byrd led 2 flights beyond the South Pole into previously unexplored areas.
Beyond the wall?
Oh! Beyond the wall. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we'll get into that. There's a little bit of that comes up. There was 60 other flights that produced thousands of hours of film and photography documenting Antarctica's uncharted coastline, bays, and inland lakes. Many tests helped naval personnel determine optimal cold weather gear, electronics, avionics, radio equipment, medicine, mechanized transport, food storage, cooking techniques, and polar sea and land survival techniques for future polar expedition. Also, they did perform highly technical helicopter, submarine, carrier, and cruiser navigation through sea ice behind their big icebreaker. And this was another major achievement because they hadn't done something on this level or scale in the past. Finally, they were successful in constructing Little America 4 on January 15, 1947. In late February 1947, naval ships and personnel suddenly withdrew back to the United States. Very weird. They were supposed to be here 6 to 8 months, and all of a sudden in February, they're calling the quits. Peacing out. The official reason for leaving was the approach of an early winter and declining weather conditions. But as we'll see in the next section, many allege that there is much more to the story.
Why did the largest military expedition to Antarctica in history seemingly turn around on a dime and retreat back to the United States? Why was the Third Reich designing mysterious disc-shaped aircrafts during World War II? And what does this have to do with Operation Highjump? What did Admiral Byrd see during his flight over Antarctica? And why did the United States return to Antarctica and deploy nuclear weapons many years following their retreat? This section is going to be a roller coaster ride. Strap in, strap on.
What we're going to do here is discuss the Operation Highjump conspiracy theory. Here we are. We're in it. Get ready. Buckle up. But first, I would like to mention, I'm not claiming that I believe what we're going to outline in this section is factual in any way, but this is the narrative for the general conspiracy theories that are associated with Operation Highjump. So we have to cover it. So let's recap. The official objectives of Operation Highjump, paraphrased, were to 1, investigate the physical geography of the region for mapping purposes. 2, develop methodology for erecting structures on ice. 3, conduct military training in frigid, harsh conditions. Now, the unofficial objectives of Operation Highjump, according to this conspiracy theory, Operation Highjump was actually a cover for a seek and destroy mission to thwart activity of escaped Third Reich Nazis that sought refuge in bases set up by Hitler in the 1930s Nazi expeditions. So let's talk about this. When we get through this, this doesn't sound as crazy as it might right off the hop. We do know, we've talked about this on the podcast in previous episodes, there were many Ratlines and escaped Nazis. This is true. For listeners unfamiliar with the term Ratlines, these were established escape networks and systems for German Nazis to flee Europe following the aftermath of World War II. These Ratlines, they led to havens in South America, particularly Argentina, Paraguay, Colombia, Chile, and Brazil. And it's estimated that about 30,000 Nazis fled through these Ratlines and escaped to these regions. Many of these Ratlines led to Argentina, and this is not too crazy. There's many documentaries too in Argentina where there's these pockets of Nazis. Have you seen this, Izzo? Where you have these small villages and they have the Nazi memorabilia and symbolism everywhere, and they speak German, and it's in Argentina.
Yeah, I have. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And then there's also like, sometimes you'll see people and they're like from Argentina, but they'll be like blonde hair, blue eyes, white. And they're like, oh yeah, it's like my history is German as well. It's like, okay, well, just say you're German.
Yeah, it is strange. This is true. What I'm speaking here is factual. One thing to note is Argentina is relatively close to Antarctica. So here's where some connections start coming in. I also have a side note here, going on a tangent for a second while we're talking about Ratlines. And we did cover this on the podcast in the past in a Patreon exclusive episode. Some people claim that Hitler didn't actually die by suicide in 1945, but he escaped via one of these Ratlines to Argentina, where he raised a family and lived until 1962. The Ratlines are factual. Whether or not Hitler used them, I I don't know. I'm going to go probably not, but it's out there. It's a theory. A huge major note is that in July and August 1945, post World War II, after Germany's surrender, there were, in fact, 2 German Nazi U-boats that were spotted arriving in Argentina. The U-530 landed at the Argentine naval base Mar del Plata on July 10th, 1945, and the U-977 landed at the same base on August 17th, 1945. Some allege that these U-boats possibly were used to bring Nazis, including Hitler and Eva Braun, his wife at the time, to Antarctica. And the reasoning here, Argentina is very close to Antarctica. So the idea was, did they go to Antarctica first, drop people off, and then go to Argentina and surrender the U-boats? Or did they actually just go straight to Argentina? This is tying into the conspiracy theory. Now, factually, what we can say here, we know the Ratlines are true, and we know the U-boats showed up in Argentina on those dates. Everything else is conjecture and narrative at this point. But it could be the case. It could be the case. Do you think Adolf escaped?
I think so.
Oh,
yeah,
excellent.
I'm one of those believers. Maybe I was like influenced by there's like a TV show, Hunters, where they like hunt Nazis, and that was one of like the major. Okay, spoiler alert. That was one of the major twists, was that they went to Argentina to kill Hitler because he didn't, in fact, die in Germany.
Right.
And like I was influenced by that, so I think just too many resources and too smart to go out the way he did.
Hey, I'm hearing you. I remember covering this a long time ago. I think this was before you were officially with the podcast. Yeah. Like Patreon number 3, we covered it, and I was fairly convinced as well. There is a solid story there, and there's a lot of research and documents that he even had a kid, that the kid's still alive. It's crazy. But to digress, let's get back into Operation Highjump. Before we continue the episode, if you enjoy listening to our crazy shit, the people you hang out with probably will too. Do us a solid and please pass on this episode to your social media friends on Facebook, Instagram, X, or other platforms. We would definitely appreciate your support. I'd also like to take this time to shout out some of our valued listeners. Firstly, we'd like to shout out some of our OG supporters on Patreon who have been with us since the beginning. Shout out to Satan Loves You, Humpy Joe, Spurgalicious Asshat, Dana, Selma K, and Curtis D. Big cheers to all of you. And lastly, huge shoutouts to our newest initiates on Patreon. Massive shoutouts to Jackson Danger and Close Samples for joining our Slap That Ass tier, and to Anastasia D. Simone coming in at that Ride the Wave tier. To everyone else, thank you immensely for listening to the show, and please feel free to submit your topic or drink recommendations at theswervepodcast.com. May good karma and vibes be with all of you. Quickly, before we continue the episode, we wanted to share with you a fellow explorer of the unknown. His name is Jeff, and he hosts the Strangeology podcast, a podcast exploring the world of weird.
Ever wonder what really lurks in the darkest corners of our world, or what mysteries lie hidden in the depths of the universe? Welcome to the Strangeology podcast, your gateway to the extraordinary. Join me for each episode as I unravel the world's secrets, from encounters with cryptids, aliens, and the paranormal, to decoding ancient mysteries and having conversations with experts and researchers who deal with the strange and unexplained. Find the Strangeology podcast on all major platforms, and be sure to follow us on social media at Strangeology. The unknown is calling. Are you ready to answer?
Here's another factual story tying into Operation Highjump. There were Nazi expeditions to Antarctica. Specifically in 1938 and 1939, the Third Reich sent an expedition to explore and claim part of Antarctica. The Germans were also looking for whaling sites to set up whaling stations to reduce their dependency on Norwegian whale oil. As well, they also were looking to test aircrafts in frigid climates to prepare for possible Soviet Union warfare. This occurred just mere months before the outbreak of World War II on September 1st, 1939. So the expedition's cut short. It ends in August. This was the third official Antarctic expedition of the German Third Reich, The vessel that was used for the expedition was called the Schwabenland. So they actually did go to Antarctica before Operation Highjump and before World War II. This is fact. The Schwabenland was literally an 8,000-ton floating airport. It launched flying boats. You can call them seaplanes. Flying boats sounds sick, though.
Yeah.
And it was also able to recover these flying boats out of the sea using a crane. This expedition was to be done in secret, but it was noticed on its return as it passed Cape Town in South Africa. And this was telegraphed and published. So there is a record, even at the time when it's not secret anymore, obviously, but at the time it was secret. But even at the time when it was secret, it was known due to this telegraph. I want to note the Germans had planned to do a follow-up expedition in 1940 to 1941. But obviously, because World War II had started, this changed their priorities. So the point I want to make here is the Germans were definitely interested in Antarctica. Germany laid claim to an area known as New Schwabenland or New Swabia. Approximately 230 square miles of the continent were claimed, and they named it after that ship, which was named the Schwabenland. This was in the western area of Antarctica, known now as the Droning Maud Land. And listeners, keep Droning Maud Land in your back pocket, because that region will come up later when we get towards the end of the episode. And just keep in mind that this is in the west area. If you can, just store that somewhere. Put it in your pocket. Put it in your ass.
We can't go down that anymore.
The Rear Admiral.
Put it up your rear.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll digress. They made their claim to the territory clear. They planted flags with the Nazi symbols along the coast. And there's photos of this. You can find photos on the internet of Nazi flags and SS members in Antarctica. And they're among the weirdest photos you'll ever see, because it's so bizarre to see, SS officers and their like Louis Vuitton getup all of a sudden in very deep snow in the Antarctic. It's a very strange photo, but they do exist. I have a fun note. While they were claiming this area, they had aircrafts where they were dropping thousands of iron swastikas over the ice as they surveyed. But interesting story, none of these have been recovered. So there is also physical evidence there, but they've never been able to find where those were dropped. They mapped out large areas during these quests as well, 250,000 square kilometers. And that region is what they called the New Schwabenland or New Swabia. And they had investigated previously unknown ice-free mountain ranges, and several small ice-free lakes were discovered. I want to throw that in there, right? Doesn't that sound reminiscent of Admiral Byrd coming across non-snow covered regions? I want to note they did find regions like this.
Technically, like Antarctica is a desert where it hasn't rained in over 2 million years. So there could be areas that, don't have ice, are more lush.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, because, it's documented. But.
Yes, but I'm throwing it out there. So everything I've just said in this section is factual. And I have another fun fact. At this time, although Hitler was the Führer in Germany, the US and Germany were not at war during this expedition. So Admiral Byrd was actually invited to participate in the 1938-1939 German New Schwabenland Antarctic expedition, but he declined.
A good American.
Yeah, but he was asked.
Because I guess he did like missions before that time, right? So they just wanted like an expert in the area.
Exactly. So let's get into some of the speculative side of Operation Highjump. Let's talk about the Nazi bases in Antarctica. So we know they went there. We know they had ambitions to return. The question is, while they were there, did they build a base? Some people say they did. And what I found researching this, people refer to this Nazi base as Station 211 or Base 211. Or maybe it's 211, maybe it's 211. I don't know. But here's some conspiracy. Allegedly, the Third Reich had established secret bases in Antarctica in droning Maud land during World War II that would serve as endpoint refuges in certain established ratlines in the event the Nazis needed to escape Germany. We do also know the Nazis were experts in building underground bunkers and bases. So is it possible that during this expedition, they built a secret Nazi base in Antarctica? And we know the ratlines are factual. Was one of these ratlines intended to go to Antarctica? This is the question.
I would say yes. Yeah.
Oh, here we go. We're swerving.
Why not?
We're swerving. I mean, it's very plausible.
I feel like you would need to just build underground in Antarctica. Hide yourself from the conditions.
That's fair. Going back to the Hitler escape theory, some people also allege that Nazi scientists and Hitler, they did escape to this Station 211 post-World War II. Now, at Station 211, Nazi scientists allegedly continued to work on and develop advanced weapons and aircrafts in the years following World War II. Some allege that the advanced propulsion systems resembling UFOs were successfully created by the Nazis during this period of time. And I have a lot more on this later. Surprisingly, a lot more on this later. Maybe this isn't as crazy. Maybe I'm going to be convinced after this. Jeez, and I even know how the notes go. Fuck.
Yeah.
Not only that, the secret bases were built to also secure entrances to the inner Earth. And we have more on that later. This is the more speculative of the speculative. It's like, were they building advanced aircrafts? There's some evidence on that we'll talk about. But then the other tangent you can take, the other swerve you can go down, is not only were they doing that, they also built secret entrances to an inner Earth that they discovered. Right? It's a little bit more of a swerve than everything, but it's also there, and we'll talk about it. Allegedly, the German Admiral Donitz, in 1943, said the following regarding a secret Nazi base. Quote,
"The German submarine fleet is proud of having built for the Führer in another part of the world a Shangri-La on land, an impregnable fortress."
End quote. They were talking about some region in the world where there is a fortress built. Presumably, this would be for a ratline. And the question is this quote referring to something in Antarctica? Is this referring to Station 211? We don't know. One thing I want to mention quick. Notice the German admiral is not a rear admiral. He's just simply an admiral. So what? Is that tied to Freemasonry or something? You gotta like... like, is there some kind of like sexual ritual where you become the rear admiral instead of just admiral? Like, what are we talking about here?
Is there a front admiral?
It'd be like
I'm thinking like on a boat, you have like one guy at the front, and that's the front admiral, and then the guy in the back is the rear admiral.
Oh, that's not what I've been thinking this whole time. No. That's not what the rear admiral and the front admiral. That's not what I think. To be a front admiral, you have to be female. I don't think you can. I think all the men are rear admirals. I don't know, actually.
I don't know. Connecting the dots.
Anyways.
Naval positions and human anatomy.
Naval position? That's sexual as well.
Everything is sexual.
It's like some weird stomach position. The naval position. Assume the naval position. The rear admiral is here. Okay.
Old school planking.
Yeah. Things to think about. Now, this next section here, this is some more truth. We're going to transition out of the conspiracy about Station 211. Let's talk some reality for a second here that we can confirm. The Russians actually did find an Arctic Nazi base. This is true. So there is a Nazi base. So the point being, if they found one in the Arctic, in the north, is it outside the realm of possibility that there would also be a Nazi base in Antarctica in the South Pole? Doesn't seem that crazy.
No.
If they had one in the Arctic.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's that crazy.
It's not that crazy.
There seems to be a point of controlling both poles of Earth or having a position on both poles of Earth.
Right. 2016, Russia, they discover an abandoned Nazi base in the Arctic on the Alexandra Island in the Arctic Circle. The base was about 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole and was built in 1942 as a tactical weather station. I want to note, 1942, they built this as a tactical weather station. One thing you'll find in military operations, they will build weather stations everywhere. And it's not really a weather station. It's really an excuse in the name of science to expand your sovereignty or defensive position.
Yeah. It's not a weather station. It's a station that weathers the storm. Or weathers the weather, that survives the weather.
Or monitors.
I had something there.
You had something.
Doesn't monitor the weather. It shields itself from the weather. Fuck. Still don't
There's
have
something
it,
there.
Something there.
There's something deep and profound and poetic. But I want to mention, previous section I had mentioned, they had intentions of going back to the South Pole, 1940 to 1941. A lot of people allege they wouldn't have done that because they were in World War II at the time. They didn't have the resources. Why would they do that? They're in a war. Why wouldn't they stay in Europe? Well, actually, in 1942, when the war was going on, they did go to the Arctic and build a base. So again, while the war is going on, they're building a base. So is it really outside the realm of possibility that they also built a base in Antarctica that hasn't been discovered? I don't know. We'll see. They called this in the Arctic, the North Pole, the Schatzgrabe. There's a lot we could do with that. But this translates to the fortune seeker or the treasure hunter, depending on how you want to translate the Schatzgraber. The base was considered an old wartime myth until 2016. There was only written references of it before this, and it was supposedly destroyed in 1944. But here we are, 72 years later in 2016, it was discovered along with other wartime relics. So a quick fun note is the scientists that were stationed at this Arctic base, they were actually evacuated by a U-boat after being poisoned by polar bear meat. They were poisoned. So I was curious about how that makes any sense and why that was in the news articles I was reading. Some people have speculated it's because they ate the liver of the polar bears, which can have high vitamin A concentrations, which vitamin A at high doses is a poison. So maybe that's what happened. But I just find that very interesting.
I mean, here in Canada, you're taught from an early age not to eat polar bear liver.
That's
not
true.
to eat the neighboring animal's liver.
That's
which
very
is a polar
true.
bear. Don't step outside of your igloo.
Yes. That's a good point. That's a good point. For listeners who haven't caught on, we are a Canadian podcast. We live in Canada, and we know not to eat too much polar bear meat. Now you know as well. So the point being, it doesn't seem that crazy that there could be another base built in the South, in Antarctica. That's the point I'm trying to make. It doesn't seem too outside the realm of possibility. So let's transition back. We did bring up, they have this base, they have Nazi scientists there, allegedly. What are they working on? Let's talk about the Nazi UFO and advanced propulsion claims. So it's not only claimed that the Nazis built this secret Nazi base in Antarctica, but they also may have been in possession of secret UFO-like aircraft technology. From what I could gather, the reason that this conspiracy theory is speculated is because, one, the Nazis did engage in highly advanced and very strange aeronautics research. And this is not crazy. We did a whole topic on this where the US stole Nazi scientists post World War II during Operation Paperclip. and used them to develop rockets at NASA. This was an early episode 17. So we know governments were interested in the aeronautics research the Nazis were doing. They literally pardoned them of all their war crimes and took them in as scientists to engineer things in the United States. The Soviet Union did this as well. So we do know they were engaged in highly advanced aeronautics research. The question is, was any of this involved in disc-shaped designs? Did they have advanced tech resembling saucers? And we're going to have more on this in a second here. Long story short, they did. Number 2, Hitler had put a lot of faith into developing an advanced superweapon, which was referred to as the Wunderwaffe or Wunderwaffle. I don't know how to pronounce it properly.
Wunderwaffe.
There you go, Wunderwaffe. But as early as 1942, top military strategists began focusing on new advanced technology to counter their enemies' numbers as the tides of the war began to change. They put faith in an advanced super weapon. Now I can't even say it. Super weapon. We also know they had the V-1 and V-2 rockets, the Me-262 jet fighters. This is crazy. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. The first operational jet-powered aircrafts were from Nazi Germany. They were the only jets to see air-to-air combat in World War II. Jets. Everything else was propellers. The Nazis had fucking jets in World War II. And I read something saying that if these had been deployed approximately 6 months sooner, the Allies would have lost the fucking war. They took out, these jet fighters took out 562 Allied air fighters. And they also the Nazis had a nuclear weapons program in 1938. So the point being, if they had deployed these, you couldn't compete with these in the air. You had propeller planes fighting jets.
Yeah.
It's so crazy how close that war actually was when you look into certain details. I couldn't believe it. For listeners who are interested, I highly implore you to Google the Me-262 jet fighter. I couldn't believe they quite literally had jets in World War II. It's insane.
I had no idea. Damn.
Another thing tying into this conspiracy theory, that's kind of the Wunderwaffe theory on why there's so many conspiracy theories around this. A third important point is the Foo Fighter sightings in 1944. There were these mysterious balls of light that were seen by the Allies, assumed to be defensive weapons of the Axis powers. So there were these strange orbs, some claiming them to be crafts at this time. And we did cover this. This was episode 3 of the podcast. Super long time in the past. But for these reasons, it seems to me a lot of people piece those together to come to the conclusion that it's not outside the realm of possibility that Nazis were working on advanced disc-shaped crafts based on all of those 3 points, right? They could function as the Wunderwaffe, the super weapon that was needed as the tides of the war were changing. We know that there were sightings of UFOs in World War II. And then we also know that the Nazis clearly had advanced scientists because the US was stealing them for their own programs.
Yeah.
So the question is, if some of them were siphoned off to some secret base working independently for many years, could they have developed something? That's the question. So this is a lot of conspiracy in this section, but I want to dovetail off this and talk about some real Nazi UFO shit. So what I'm going to say here, this is what I could find relating to disc-shaped crafts that Nazi scientists were working on. And it turns out there actually was some of this going on. This is not conspiracy. The first was the Omega Discus. From 1939 to 1945, there was a German named Joseph Andreas Epp. He worked on a disc-shaped aircraft called the Omega Discus or the helioplane. This was to have a 4-meter in diameter cockpit surrounded by a 19-meter in diameter disc wing. So it quite literally looks like a UFO. There's a central cockpit, and then everything around, it's just a big circle after that. It's a disc-shaped wing. It was designed, at least, to have a ducted fan technology with 2 free-spinning rotors propelled by Pabst ramjets to move, and was allegedly tested at the Skoda factory in Praga. Allegedly, the Omega Discus was to be the carrier of the first Nazi atomic bomb.
Wow.
However, the aircraft never made it past small-scale prototypes and was strictly used for aerodynamic testing. So the question is, okay, so this guy was working on this. He had some small-scale designs. He had at least the idea set forward. So the question is, was this continued or was it not? And when we're talking about this aircraft, it's not like this is some anti-gravity craft. This was propelled by jets. It was just disc-shaped. And they worked it out so that it would have balance and could move. So it's not exactly the same thing as what you would think of when you see a UFO that's all over the place, starting and going at extreme speeds.
Yeah.
This is based on technology that's known at the time. It's just a strange design. So this was being worked on. Another thing that was being worked on, it was called the flight gyro or the Fluggriesel. So in 1944, there was this guy, Rudolf Stryver. He developed turbojet technology, and the Fluggriesel itself was a large disc fan of 20 meters in diameter with 21 rotor blades that surrounded a hemispherical cockpit. So in this case, this is more akin to a helicopter, I would say, as opposed to jet powered, based on what I was reading about it. But it does have jet engines. Under the disc rotor were 3 jet engines that spun the rotor like a helicopter. Once airborne, 2 other jets allowed level flight. It is claimed that in February 1945, the Fluggriesel attained a top speed of 1,300 miles per hour and a climb to 45,000 feet in 2 minutes. That's the claim.
That's pretty quick.
So what I can say, there's kind of like truth and not truth. You know what I mean here?
Yeah.
There is someone designing something. Whether or not this was actually built or tested, we have no idea. This is just simply a claim on the capabilities of the craft. But when I looked into it, there actually was these 2 designs that I could find, which I was shocked. So to summarize here, some claim that the Third Reich did indeed successfully develop advanced disc-shaped propulsion technology. I can confirm that the disc-shaped technology was being designed and developed, but that's all. I don't know how operational it was, if it was ever integrated militarily. We don't know anything about that. We just know some people drew some shit. One guy might have had some small-scale designs.
Yeah.
But there's many people that claim the Nazis did develop this, and this was worked on, and perhaps they do have this advanced tech. I don't know. What are your thoughts right now, mid-pod?
I think they probably have the technology, and it kind of links up with the Admiral Byrd story of him like being chased by UFOs or things that looked like UFOs, but it was really these weirdly designed planes and helicopters. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's like out of the realm of possibility. Like they have the designs and then they just hide it and develop it anyway in secret locations in the Arctic or Antarctic.
One quick thing. Are you tired of eating bland flavors day in and day out?
Yes. It's absolutely unbearable.
Do you want every meal to have extra bite?
Of course, I want this hell to end.
Then you should try Flavors of the Forest Bigfoot Breath, a premium raw garlic dust. I've been dusting Bigfoot Breath garlic dust, especially the spicy variety, on many things, such as eggs, steaks, pizza, but really whatever.
Thank goodness for Bigfoot garlic dust. I thought I was a goner.
If this sounds interesting to you, you can check them out using the link in our description or go to flavorsforest.com/swerve.
Now, we do receive a small kickback from purchases through our link at no cost to you, so it is a great way to support the show if you choose to do so.
That's flavorsforest.com/swerve. Use promo code SWERVE for 15% off your order of Bigfoot Breath garlic dust. flavorsforest.com/swerve, promo code SWERVE for 15% off. I want to talk about some more Nazi strangeness relating to the UFOs. And this part is very hard to confirm. Most of this is conjecture and conspiracy, but let's talk about it because we're going to swerve. We're here to fucking swerve. Let's talk about some occult Nazi stuff. It was also claimed or it has also been claimed that the Third Reich was also channeling information from an advanced society, specifically the German Vril Society and the Thule Society. These were occult groups in Germany, and allegedly they were in communication with unknown entities. The information gained from this channeling of this advanced society was also used to back engineer a crashed UFO and construct what was called the Haunebu 1. Have you heard about the Haunebu 1?
No.
Okay, so we're going out on a ledge here. We're swerving pretty hard, but let's go through it. We're going to talk about a lot of crazy shit real quick. I have a side note here. Not only were disc-shaped anti-gravity crafts allegedly being constructed, but the Thule Society was also trying to develop a Nazi time machine, the Die Clock, which translated means the bell. Have you heard about either of those? Obviously not the Haunebu 1, but the Die Clock. Did you hear about this ever?
It sounds familiar to me. Maybe not the actual name, but just like the time travel capabilities.
Okay. So the Die Clock is allegedly a large bell-shaped object made of heavy metal and filled with a mercury-like fluid that glowed during tests and required large amounts of electricity and would levitate during these tests. It was claimed that it was able to traverse time when positioned in between special Stonehenges. Now, we could go down a rabbit hole here, but I think we save Die Clock for another day. I just want to bring it up now because allegedly both the Die Clock and the Haunebu 1 were built, the designs for these objects and these crafts, through channeling by the Vril and the Thule Society. In addition to that, these advanced propulsion systems, some claim that this enabled key members of the Third Reich to escape Germany post-World War II and seek refuge in a secret Nazi Antarctic base. Things are coming together here.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, of course he escaped then if he had the ability to traverse time.
To traverse time. He could be here right now.
Yeah.
Now, let's continue on to some other tangents. That's some of the occult claims. There was also searches the Nazis engaged in looking for weapons of mass destruction and technology that would enable them to get this Wunderwaffe. Allegedly, the Third Reich sent members on expeditions around the world in search for ancient weapons of mass destruction or fantastic ancient technology mentioned in various ancient texts. For example, when I looked into this, they were looking for something called the thunderclap, and this was referenced in an Indian Sanskrit text. Some believe that this was evidence for the use of a nuclear weapon in this ancient Sanskrit text called the thunderclap. So the Nazis were interested in this and they were exploring regions looking for information about this.
Not just the clap, but the thunderclap.
Yep, here we go. The Agnya was cited in an ancient Mahabharata text. Here's a quote from this text. Quote,
"White hot smoke that was 1,000 times brighter than the sun rose in infinite brilliance and reduced the city to ashes. Water boiled, horses and war chariots were burned by the thousands, and the corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings."
End quote. They also had a mission to locate the Holy Grail and apparently devoted considerable resources to this cause.
I mean, we knew about that from Indiana Jones.
Right.
That's
did.
literally the plot of one of the movies.
And apparently it's also a conspiracy theory. Probably derived from that plot, but
Yeah.
hey, here we are, reporting it as fact. The Third Reich did make an expedition to Tibet in 1938 to 1939, and it was stated that Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the SS, he also authorized this particular expedition, and he was also fascinated by Asian mysticism. So they go to Tibet looking for
Had
stuff.
yellow fever.
Could be.
He was really into like Asian girls and anime.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's an atomic weapon, my Führer, in Tibet. Could be. The main point I'm trying to make here is that some allege that it's not outside the realm of possibilities that the Nazis discovered ancient technology or methods that were used to create advanced propulsion systems. Maybe they did find something. Maybe this was how they were able to develop this technology. That's what some allege. Let's continue down this conspiracy. We talked about the channeling of an advanced society building crafts. We talked about some legit designs that were disc-shaped. But here's something crazy. We're going a little bit more in conspiracy territory. I can't verify this crash, but apparently there was a UFO that crashed in Germany in a black forest in 1936. There's an alleged report that's commonly cited as to how Nazis may have developed disc-shaped aircrafts, and it comes from an account claiming that Germans recovered a crashed disc-shaped craft from a black forest in 1936. The alleged crashed craft still possessed an undamaged engine, and furthermore, the crew was alive in this story. Strangely, the occupants, they were extraterrestrial, but they were humans. They were extraterrestrial humans, and they called themselves the Nordiques or the Nordics.
Huh.
Interesting, right?
I guess that makes sense if this occurred before they had any Antarctica missions.
Yeah. The claim is that these Nordics helped German engineers construct a fleet of anti-gravity crafts similar to the crashed vehicle. These anti-gravity crafts were called the Hanabu. They utilized ferrofluid vortex engines and electricity to generate an anti-gravity effect, some type of spinning mechanism required for the engine. Allegedly, the Hanabu 1 was approximately 75 feet in diameter and operated for the first time in August 1939, a few weeks before the outbreak of World War II. I would like to note again that there were Foo Fighters observed by many different nation states during World War II, and many thought that these glowing orbs were prototypes of enemy crafts. They were confused by what they were seeing, these pilots. So there were legit sightings of strange sky phenomena during World War II, we could say. So the question is, does it relate to anything we just said or not?
I'm having like this idea right now where the orbs didn't attack because maybe the crash ship didn't have any weapons on it. It's just meant for like exploring purposes. So then they're able to operate these in the sky, but they have no way of like fighting, or they didn't have time to mount weapons on them.
That's a good idea.
Which is why they just occur just by sight and not actually like fighting with them.
They just monitor and like relay information. Like there's fighter jets over here.
Yeah.
Like, or something like that. Yeah, that's a good, I like that take. So the question is, if the Nazis did establish this secret Nazi base in Antarctica, did they use it to hide their newly acquired advanced technology? So let's get into Admiral Byrd's diary entry, because this is where things all come to a point. Everything connects. Let's talk about Admiral Byrd. During Operation Highjump, he did a flying mission over Antarctica. He reports actually having met a strange civilization in Antarctica, and some claim that this may have been this advanced Third Reich society or some combination of Nazis and the Nordics that helped construct the crafts. You really can't disentangle the two. This is just what I found when I'm reading about this. So we have a lot to get through here. We're gonna read a lot of direct quotes from Admiral Byrd's diary. And during his flight, he starts encountering some issues at about 9-10 hours. He notes the following quote:
"Both magnetic and gyro compasses beginning to gyrate and wobble. We are unable to hold our heading by instrumentation taking bearing with sun compass. Yet all seems well. The controls are seemingly slow to respond and have sluggish quality, but there is no indication of icing."
End quote. So Admiral Byrd found himself flying over a vast open area at this point. It was lush with vegetation, and the frost from his airplane strangely begins to melt away. At 10 hours, he notes the following quote:
"We are crossing over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best as can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center portion. There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning and the gyroscope is oscillating back and forth."
End quote. Just 5 minutes later, Admiral Byrd begins seeing something unbelievable. At 10:05 hours, he notes,
"I alter altitude to 1400 feet and execute a sharp left turn to better examine the valley below. It is green with either moss or a type of tight-knit grass. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn and we spot what seems to be a large animal of some kind below us. It appears to be an elephant. No, it looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible, yet there it is. Decrease altitude to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed. It is definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp."
At this point, his radio has lost all function. He can't communicate with base camp. Things take an even stranger turn. Flying saucers intercept Admiral Byrd and take over his airplane. And even more strange than that, allegedly the saucers had swastikas on them. At 11:30 hours, he notes the following:
"Countryside below is more level and normal, if I may use that word. Ahead, we spot what seems to be a city. This is impossible. Aircraft seems light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. My God. Off our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft. They are closing rapidly alongside. They are disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They are close enough now to see the markings on them. It is a type of swastika. Where are we? What has happened? I tug at the controls again. They will not respond. We are caught in an invisible vice grip of some type."
The flying saucers, they actually end up guiding Admiral Byrd into an underground area where he meets a tall, blonde-haired person called the Master. This is pretty fucking sexual, I'm just gonna say. Rear Admiral, the Master, like, what are we talking about?
Tall, blonde.
Byrd notes in the flight log that the city appeared to look like, quote, "a large shimmering city pulsating with rainbow hues of color," end quote. The Rear Admiral is he's going on parades. Now he's in a rainbow city talking to the Master. This is some plot for some fucking gay porn.
Not that we would know anything about that. But.
Not there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying maybe the conspiracy really is a metaphor. To digress, getting back to the story here. The story also ties into the Hollow Earth theory and this lost inner Earth kingdom of Agartha. Some people allege that this is what Agartha is. And we did cover this in episode 76, this Hollow Earth Agartha theory. But when Byrd gets into this village or city or kingdom, according to the Master, this is what he's telling Richard Byrd, their civilization was wary of nuclear bomb activity and the wars happening on Earth because they also share the planet. And if nuclear weapons are going off, they have issue with that. Admiral Byrd was to deliver this message to the US government, and he does do this. He informs the president, but apparently this fails. So instead, the US military, this is where Operation Highjump comes in. They send an immense fleet of the military down to Antarctica as a part of Operation Highjump. The Nazis launch a retaliation using their advanced flying saucers and obviously outmaneuver the fleet, emerging out of the water, moving, close to the speed of light or at lightning speeds, turning on a dime. These flying Nazis destroy several fighter aircrafts and sink 3 ships within 20 minutes. Apparently, in a Russian documentary by Vitaly Pravdivstev, there is an alleged eyewitness account of Lieutenant John Sayerson from the deck of the Casablanca witnessing Nazi flying saucers sinking the destroyer Murdoch with a ray gun type weapon. Allegedly, many of Admiral Byrd's men were lost and 4 aircraft disappeared. This is why the U.S. forces retreat. This is the narrative of the conspiracy theory. Very wild, very crazy. Shall we add some more craziness to this?
Might as well.
Let's talk about Operation Tabarin and Operation Argus. So there's 2 main sources that people point to as evidence that certain Antarctic operations were actually seek and destroy Nazis in Antarctica missions. And this is Operation Tabarin by the British and Operation Argus by the US. And we actually talked about Operation Argus on our Antarctica episode. The claim is that the Allied forces were aware of the Nazi base in Antarctica and they performed operations to destroy them. The first of which is Operation Tabarin, which from 1943 to 1945, the British launched a secret wartime Antarctic operation codenamed Tabarin. The men from the Special Air Services Regiment, the SAS, the SAS, the Britain's covert forces seemed to be involved. So they're alleging this special force, the SAS, they're engaging in some operation to go to Antarctica to kill Nazis. It's alleged that this operation was intended to destroy the secret Nazi base around Christmas of 1945, but it's also claimed that this operation was ineffective because the Antarctic Nazis were too powerful. So similar situation that Byrd went through, right? He's talking to the master. He goes back to the president. President's like, nah, fuck that. We're going to go down there, bomb this shit.
Yeah.
Get outmaneuvered by advanced crafts, maybe the Hanabu 1. I don't know. This is the story. I'm not saying that I'm fully engaged in this, but this is the claim. And then the other claim is that the British were doing the same thing. Operation Argus, or not doing the same, they did the same thing and had to retreat. So this leads us to Operation Argus, which is a real program. So is Tabarin, by the way. People allege with Operation Argus, perhaps this was another attack. In 1958, there were 3 nuclear weapons that were exploded in the region as part of the classified US-based Operation Argus. It is alleged that this operation was the final nail in the coffin, basically the US bombing the shit out of these Antarctic Nazi bases with nuclear weapons. That's the claim. Let's go, before we get into, we're going to go, at the end of this episode, we're going to go through things from a different perspective. But before we get to that, I want to add the mysterious death of Admiral Byrd's son, because this kind of colors the entire story in a very strange way. And this story I'm about to tell is 100% factual and it's bizarre, and I really can't make sense of it. So Admiral Byrd's son was also named Richard Evelyn Byrd. So he was also Dick Byrd III, technically. He was a lieutenant commander in the Naval Reserve and had also accompanied his father during Operation Highjump. So he was there. In 1988, Byrd Jr. was on his way from Boston to Washington, D.C. to give a big speech about his father at a National Geographic Society event honoring Admiral Byrd. He never made it to D.C. and was found dead in an abandoned warehouse in Baltimore 3 weeks later, wearing different clothing and one shoe. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration, but some allege that he was being monitored and he had prepared to expose secrets about Operation Highjump at the event where he was to honor his father. In order to prevent this, someone silenced him. Very weird. This is one thing I don't understand. It's a very strange event. It seems the death doesn't make sense to me at all.
No. I mean, wanting to silence him makes sense. I don't know. It seems like they obviously kept him alive and tortured or not tortured, but just like kept him alive for 3 weeks until he just died from dehydration.
Yeah. To summarize the conspiracy narrative we just went through this section, the Nazis had established a Nazi base in Antarctica during the 1938-39 expedition. The base also served as an escape point for Hitler and other SS members. Through technical, scientific, extraterrestrial, and/or occult means, the Nazis had developed highly advanced disc-shaped crafts, which were stored in Antarctica. Admiral Byrd uses Operation Highjump as a cover story to attack the Nazi base. Knowing the British SAS had tried and failed previously, they also fail and retreat. Many years later, via Operation Argus, the US military finishes the job, launching 3 nuclear weapons at the Nazi fortress. Finally, his son is killed to conceal the secret diary and the truth about what happened. I think this is a good time to hop into our final thoughts section.
Yeah, let's do it.
Before we move on, we would like to give massive props and credits to our producer tier on Patreon. Thank you to David Cheesem, Shelly Terry, Alexius Ryan, Big Balls Small Wiener, Batcat Meatloaf, Velcro Shoe Guy, Tosh Collins, Honest Elliot, and Christian J for enabling today's episode and the continued growth of the show. So before we get into our personal final thoughts, I want to go through a litany of different criticisms in this narrative, because even just going through it, I'm highly convinced. It sounds really dope. Yeah. It's such a convincing story. Everything fits in these nice little pockets. And I really, really like this story. I think this is why this is so popular. And this is probably why this won our topic voting, because a lot of people are interested in this story. But we got to go through the criticisms here. The first, I don't think there was actually a Nazi UFO war. The only fatalities I could confirm from Operation Highjump are with 4 different people, and none of them had to do with Nazi UFOs. When I looked into it, on December 30th, 1943, there were 3 aviation radio men that were killed when their planes crashed during a whiteout blizzard. The 6 others survived, and they were rescued 13 days later. Now, I want to note that this crash was actually on the opposite side of the continent of Droning Maudland, which, if you'll remember, I said to store that in your rear, pull it out. That's where the claimed Nazi base was. This was across the continent, not even close to that. On January 21st, 1947, there was also a crew member killed in a ship unloading accident, and he died under a piece of roller equipment designed to pave the ice for an airstrip. Horrific death. But those are the only 4 that I could find official deaths related to Operation Highjump. There wasn't these planes that were destroyed and other people dying. Now, furthermore, I looked into that Russian documentary alleging that there was ray guns being used, and it turns out the Casablanca was decommissioned in June 1946, which was 2 months before the operation. So it wasn't even in use, which I found interesting. The Murdoch also, which was claimed to be destroyed by this attack during Operation Highjump, it actually didn't exist. So it was claimed to be destroyed by this ray gun, but the Murdoch never existed. It's just tied into the story.
But the U.S. wants it to not exist and the Casablanca to be decommissioned. So if these things do get destroyed, it's like, oh, yeah, they were never there.
It could be. It could be. I'm just going to go through some other things that I found. This natural oasis in Antarctica, I was trying to figure out what could possibly explain what Admiral Byrd might have seen. And the Bunger Hills, this is a region that's notably ice-free throughout the year, and it lies south of the Highjump archipelago. Activities that were once classified have become, this is a huge dispute also to this whole thing. Activities that were once classified have become declassified, and speculation on these operations, you don't really need to speculate because you can actually see the declassified documents. So there's this guy from Cambridge University and another guy from Toronto, of all places. They wrote and published a paper on this whole Operation Highjump thing, going through the historical records as best they could. And this paper is called Hitler's Antarctic Base, The Myth and the Reality. They published it in the Polar Record, and it was written by Colin Summerhays. This is the guy from Cambridge, and Peter Beeching, the guy from Toronto. This is their conclusions. They conclude that there wasn't any Antarctic Nazi bases. Their first point is that there is no mention in any German documents that a base was to be established in the 1938 to 39 expedition. There is also no known German documents indicating that German activity continued in Joning Maudland after the Schwabenland expedition in 1939 to 38 to 39. They say that the next time there is actual documentation of the Germans doing anything in Antarctica was 1959. So essentially they're saying we don't have a record, which you could push back on. I mean, Nazis destroyed a lot of records. They're saying they can't find a record. Number two, they say that the British were setting up bases in Antarctica during the war in 1941, specifically to block German activity in the area. So why would the Germans set up a base if the British were already there setting up bases to block their activity? And then three, Admiral Donitz, that quote that I read earlier about Shangri-La and there being this impregnable fortress, that quote doesn't exist.
What?
We can't find it anywhere. It's just been Chinese telephoned from somewhere, and it's just a great part of the narrative. Number four, the authors assert based on records, there would be no time to build the base, nor was the correct motorized equipment even available to do so on the ship. Based on several estimates they made, the Germans had only approximately 10 days to build a base inland. So the question is, how likely is it they built a secret underground facility in 10 days? So going with the official records, the timing doesn't make sense. It would be very unlikely. Further, they say the Germans were in a discovery phase, building maps at the time. So how is it possible to build a base when you don't even know the area yet? This was more like a exploration mission as opposed to construction mission. Number five, they say thousands of scientists have visited and explored Joning Maudland, and there's no signs of a German base. So for all those reasons, they conclude there probably isn't a German base in Antarctica. I don't know. We can respond. We can ping off this. I don't know what you think, but
I mean, a lot of their things are based on like official records, and like you mentioned it before, a lot of records get destroyed or classified, and you can't rely on just original sources because they're simply not available. So if you do just rely on original, authentic sources, yeah, the story doesn't make sense.
Yeah, one pushback I have on their paper was that the official records say that the Nazis dumped these swastikas across the Arctic or Antarctica, and we haven't found any of them. So it's like you have official sources saying something was done, but we haven't found that. So is it outside the realm of possibility? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you couldn't even find the swastikas, it's like, well, of course you're not going to find this base.
Yeah, and even like the base in the Arctic, like alleged to have exist, and then it's like, oh no, it was destroyed or abandoned, and then 72 years later you find it.
That's true.
And it's there.
That's the official records say it was destroyed, and it was not destroyed. So yeah. I mean, there is a lot of pushback on this, but I do like their take. If you go through the timing, which I guess you could lie about, but I don't know. If you would only have 10 days. So I do like that point a lot. But obviously, as we've just brought up, there are ways to gymnastic around the points they brought up. But here's another theme in the paper they wrote, pushing back on all of this. They said the U-boats did not go to Antarctica with Nazis, because that was a part of the story. Was this a rat line? Did they stop in Antarctica, then go to Argentina, dropping people off at this previously constructed base? They think this did not happen. Their first reason is that interrogation by Allied forces post-capture in Argentina revealed no indications of having gone to Antarctica based on the dates, the timing, and the speed of the U-boat submarines and the fuel. So this would suggest that there had been no feasible way to make it to Antarctica first and then Argentina. And they do go through, like their speed and fuel stuff. And I'm assuming that they did those calculations. So I think what they're saying here could be true unless there was additional fuel stores that just weren't known about.
Yeah. I'll say one thing about that. Like, I don't know if it's just, again, me being inspired by Hollywood, but one of the movies, it's like the Ungentlemanly Acts of Warfare or something like that. But essentially it's about like Nazi Germany and how around the continent of Africa, they had like small islands that they just fully occupied and like used to like store and build things and fuel their ships and U-boats. So there could have been another one of those islands somewhere closer to maybe South Africa or,
Right.
Argentina that allows them to dock and refuel. And
secret
resupply.
refueling stations, storage facilities.
Yeah.
That could be the case too. But based on their analysis, they say unlikely. They also, this is a good point too, they say there's just too much ice. So you would run out of air traveling under the ice at these times because you couldn't surface. But they also mention that you would likely be damaged by pack ice. So the subs aren't meant to break through the ice. And here's a fun fact. In Operation Highjump, that submarine that they did bring, it was damaged trying to surface through the ice. So their point overall is, at this time, the technology was not designed to break through the ice at all. So they're like, how could these U-boats have made it to Antarctica at this time? You would have run out of air, and also you probably would have been damaged in the process. So they conclude U-boats did not go to Antarctica. That's their take. Now, they have another section where their thesis is Operation Highjump did not encounter Nazis. And I want to mention Operation Highjump was not super secret. We talk about it as if it was, and there's some truth to that, but they made films about it back in the day. There's Admiral Byrd was even in these films, and they used a lot of that footage and that they recorded during the time in it. And on the operation, they had 11 journalists on the ships, and they transmitted 2,011 messages totaling 478,338 words to Radio Washington for onward transmission to their employers. So there's a lot of information going out, even during the operation, about the operation. So it wasn't entirely secret as the conspiracy narrative describes it as. So the first reason they think there was no Nazis, they say that the military mission to destroy Nazi bases on droning Maudland was very weird because the entirety of the Operation Highjump was centered on Byrd's Little America 4 base on the Ross Ice Shelf, which happens to be on the opposite side of the continent. That's a good point. They're not close. They're completely removed from each other. 2, there were exploratory flights during Operation Highjump, but the U.S. Navy flew over almost none of the territory mapped by the Germans in 1938 to 39. Again, are they mapping everything, or they have secret maps with more detail? You could make that point. 3, part of the reason they left early was because they started much later than they wanted to. They only had one icebreaker. I mentioned that early on, available at the time, and they encountered 1,000 kilometers of ice unexpectedly. So it wasn't until much later during their departure that they had 2 icebreakers available. So you can only get the smaller ships through if you have the big one breaking the ice in front. And they only had one of those going there. So they had to leave early. I should also mention that the ships were not ice strengthened. So they did need to leave before winter or risk significant damages. And then for the later U.S. operations, particularly Operation Windmill, which happened from 1947 to 48, did not go to droning Maudland. So this is their reasoning for no Nazis being encountered at this time. It wasn't that they were attacked by UFOs. They simply encountered too much ice. They left too late. So they had to leave early because there was too much ice, which was going to slow them down. And also, I think the smoking gun is they're just in opposite sides of the continent.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty hard point to argue against.
You could just say the Nazis said that they went to droning Modland, but they weren't at droning Modland. Like, you could say that. But I mean, that's the pushback on everything. It's always, you can see the trend in what, like, when we're pushing back, it's like, well, they could have just said that. And it's true, they could have. Like, we don't fucking know. But at some point, it's like, at what point do you take, I don't know. I don't know. I still like it. Anyhow, I'm going to continue. They also say Operation Tabarin, this thing that happened during Christmas, they didn't encounter Nazis either. They say, 1, the operation did not establish bases anywhere near drowning Modland. This is where the Nazi bases were claimed to be. 2, the British bases were tiny. They were only 5 to 13 people. So it wasn't really an army that the narrative claims it was. It was very small teams. And 3rd, no SAS were sent to droning Modland, so the idea of attacking Nazi bases is not supported. There were 3 former SAS dudes in the Falk Islands, and this is likely where the theory comes from. That's what they're saying. Now, finally, they continue to say Operation Argus did not blow up a Nazi base. And this is good factual information. Firstly, they didn't take place very close to Antarctica. They took place 1,760 kilometers or 1,100 miles southwest of Cape Town, South Africa, and consisted of 3 very high altitude test shots of the W-25 warhead to investigate the effects of nuclear explosions outside the atmosphere. So apparently, through this operation, the military wanted to understand how charged particles and radioactive isotopes released would interact with Earth's magnetic field. They were wondering if it could potentially interfere with radar tracking, communications, and the electronics of satellites, and the use of ballistic missiles. So the nuclear tests were 3,500 kilometers north of droning Modland, which is where the base is claimed to be, or they were 2,280 kilometers north, or 2,390 kilometers north. So the main point being is, like, they weren't even fucking close to where the claimed base was. And they were also 160 to 750 kilometers in the air is where they were launched. So they weren't land detonations. So I think the Operation Argus theory is very thoroughly debunked, given the sheer latitude and longitude of where these things happened. And it's not even latitude and longitude. It's also like a Z factor too. It's there's an altitude to it. Yeah. Also, they mention in their paper that there was no peaks in 1958 ice core samples for radiation, according to the British Antarctic Survey. And if there was nuclear weapons launched in Antarctica, those ice cores would have radioactive signatures, and they did not. Solid. I like that. That's solid.
Yeah.
Solid.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about Operation Highjump, not Operation Argus.
Yeah. I know. But it is part of the narrative.
Yeah.
So I like their paper. We'll have a link to it in the description if listeners, you want to take a look at it, tell us what you think, see for yourself what some of the strong pushbacks are. But simply when I was going through this, I was just trying to think things in a common sense way. And you start to find a lot of problems very quickly. So the first question is, why didn't they use the flying saucer technology to win the war? It's pretty simple, right? Why just stay in Antarctica? Why not just win? You have your Van der Waff.
I mean, yeah, my whole thing about them not being able to mount the weapons onto the craft or just being used for monitoring purposes. But even then, like, if you get positions quicker and stuff, you can make moves to win. But it could have just arrived too late as well, or like been ready too late. Could be the case too. Just like the jet propulsion. It technically could be the case because Operation Highjump was about a year later. So there would be this year of time. You could say the tech wasn't ready. Maybe it was developed in that time. So that is an option. One thing is, we brought this up, but Project Paperclip brought top Nazi scientists over to the US and they worked on NASA rocket technology. So the question is, why weren't they working on flying saucer technology? Why did they devote their time to rockets?
that's a common sense thing you could bring up. I mean, you could push back on that one easy.
Yeah, it wasn't the same scientists that were in Antarctica that were brought to the NASA program.
If the Nazis had this technology, why would they just sit dormant in Antarctica even today? Why not use your power over the globe today? So even in the argument of, oh, it just wasn't developed at the time, well, why not use it now?
Because fascism isn't in.
Yeah, it's not trendy.
Yeah.
So to me, collectively, it brings up a lot of doubts. But I fucking love this story so much. I love the story so much. It's so good. I'm so happy it was recommended because it's a great story. It's a really good story. I want to say while we're in final thoughts, one of the most important things for me in this research, it kind of seems to me using vagueness, just being vague about your description of things, it's a very powerful tool for forming alternative historical narratives because the whole thing has loose truth in the story, but it really relies on vagueness to support the connections. And then when you kind of do a deep dive, that fog is removed and the connections that are being made sort of crumble. So a good example, well, the Operation Argus thing, as soon as you look into that, you see that the X, Y, and Z coordinates are not even close to what the story says. Or you also look into the timing. And when you break down how long it takes to get from Germany to Antarctica and back, it turns out you only have 10 days to build the base in the expedition. So once you remove the vagueness, you start seeing the connections fall apart. And I just want to put that out there because we do a lot of these deep dives on many topics. And it seems that's a consistent thing that I'm seeing is vagueness supports a lot of theory. But when you get very hyper specific, the theories start to break down. I don't know what. Yeah,
I would agree. Yeah, vagueness helps in this case, and like most people, they're not going to do deep research into it. They'll learn about Operation Highjump, Argus, all these other secret classified projects, and then they'll start linking them together. And it's like, oh yeah, of course this happened because look how everything chronologically just happens, like the discovery and then the building of the bases, and then you have to like destroy the bases and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with the vagueness bit.
Yeah. Now, dovetailing off that, one thing that still I undecided on what I think about this, the biggest swerve for me is the death of Admiral Byrd's son. It seems so sketchy. It seems sketchy as fuck. I don't understand. That's a very weird one for me personally. Everything else, the story you can poke holes into, but Admiral Byrd's son's death, what is that all about? He's in different clothes. He's wearing one shoe. He was on his way to give this speech and he's just found dead in a warehouse in Baltimore. It doesn't seem like it's a coincidence to me.
No, I don't know. You don't like, we don't know what he was dealing with. Maybe he was being followed. Maybe he had some bad loans, bad debts. Yeah, that one is weird.
I found some people saying he had early dementia, or maybe he even had dementia or Alzheimer's or something. And they were saying he just got trapped in the warehouse. But I'm like, he was there for 3 weeks before he was found. So I don't know. And he's in different clothes. It's that one for me. I don't know how that ties in. It seems sketchy. It seems very sketchy.
Yeah.
Lastly, this whole topic is just, it's fun. It's fun and funny. We got Nazi flying saucers. We have sexy human extraterrestrials.
Gay innuendos.
Yeah, a lot of, this inner earth, Rainbow City with woolly mammoths. I'm starting to think woolly mammoth is just, it's just a phrase. It's just like a bear, right?
I was thinking the
for a
same
Nordic,
thing.
a woolly mammoth. So I don't know what's going on. It's a great topic. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered it all.
Okay.
Or at least all the things that I wanted to talk about. So before we roll out of the episode, I do want to mention that we do have currently 3 different paid tiers on Patreon. We have a $1 Ride the Wave tier where we drop 1 extra Patreon exclusive episode each month and shout you out on the podcast. And you can get access to episodes such as Mel's Hole, where we talk about a weird hole that, you can throw anything in and it just disappears. A lot of strangeness associated with it. Or also topics like Lake Baikal, where we talk about another natural, strange occurring place on Earth that has many encounters and weird stories associated with it, much like Antarctica does. And then for $3, we have the Slap That Ass tier, where you get early access on Sundays instead of Wednesdays for all main episodes. And you get a Patreon exclusive holographic sticker pack. And lastly, we have a $10 producer tier where you will be credited at the end of all main topic episodes, as well as receive 1 monthly special bonus Patreon exclusive episode. And right now we're doing a Connecting the Dots series where we have 12 topics that are randomly generated from topics that we've covered both on Patreon and main episodes. And then we try and create a story that links them all together. So that's what you get in that $10 producer tier as well. So make sure to go and sign up on our Patreon for one of the paid tiers or for free so you can be included in the voting that happens to determine what we record next.
Now that is out of the way, today we're going to roll out to a song called There's a Nightmare in My Closet from an artist named Joel off his EP called Diversions. We featured him on the podcast before, but as always, if you like what you hear today, we'll have a link to Joel's website in the description. And lastly, if you're a listener of the show and you produce your own music that fits the themes we cover or just our vibe in general, please feel free to reach out. We're trying to do something new where we would like to feature underappreciated art if we can and help with exposure in some small way. I would like to thank everybody for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a really fun one to research. And with that, slap that ass
and ride the wave.
Put your shoes on, we got a long walk home. And grab your pitchfork and your torch, it's a long dark road. And if you stay close to me, we'll make it through the night. You know the monsters come out when they see the street lights. And there's something in the dark that we've all heard of. Do they come from below or come from above? And there's something in the dark that gets into my head. I think they're hiding in the closet and under the bed. There's a cool breeze blowing across my face. I gotta get up, get out, get away from this forsaken place. And when they talk to me, I don't know what to say. I hold my ears and close my eyes, but they won't go away. And there's something in the dark that we've all heard of. Do they come from below or come from above? And there's something in the dark that gets into my head. I think they're hiding in the closet and under the bed. dark that we've all heard of? Do they come from below or come from above? And there's something in the dark that gets into my head. I think they're hiding in the closet and under the bed. They're hiding under the bed. They're hiding under the bed. No! I gotta get away.
You know, he's okay to stick his neck out per se. And his bot. No.